So it's Monday in a big way. And I want to give a shout out to our team that's been working behind the scenes. It's now, when you hear this later on the podcast, it's going to be all neatly edited and tied together, and you're not going to realize that there's been this frenzied sort of a start to our broadcast week here. It's 25 minutes after we typically go on the air, and we've been experiencing a number of really interesting technical glitches, sort of like one and then another and then another, and they're all compounding. And I'm really proud of the team here and how everybody's been working to get us back on the air. So here's the thing. It seems to me this is a really interesting start, and so I'm going to freewheel for a little bit because what's happened is we're experiencing technical difficulties that are hitting us not only on our broadcast platforms, so to speak, though this is always, situations like these are always a great opportunity for us to remind you that if things go sideways, for example, on YouTube, you can always live stream our audio on Mixlr, MIXLR. You can just download the app. You look for Real Talk Ryan Jesperson. You can subscribe. That's how we know a whole bunch of people every single morning will live stream us audio, whether it's on their commute or whether they're on a road trip or whatever. So Mixlr is always a great backup. But what's going on is we've had some of our platforms interrupted this morning, and that's including our ability to host guests, including our ability to bring guests in. And so on a day like today, and I'm laughing so I don't cry, it's National Indigenous Peoples Day, and Sarah's done just a remarkable job putting a formidable lineup together. And obviously some of those interviews aren't going to happen today, which is really disappointing for us. We're going to get Dr. Michael Hart back on the show. He's Vice Provost for Indigenous Engagement at the University of Calgary. We're going to talk about what indigenization means, what that looks like. We're also hoping, and we're not giving up on this interview quite yet, we're hoping to speak with Georgina Liberty and Robert Watt from Canada's new Office of Indigenous Languages. They're two of the first appointees to the Office of the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages. We're going to learn more about what Canada is doing as a nation in the early stages under the direction of Minister Mark Miller. That coming up a little later today. We're still holding out hope that we're going to be able to get our tech stuff all figured out, so I'll be able to check in with Chef Andrew George Jr. We're going to talk about the joy of cooking and culture and tradition and how that fits in, or how his process as a chef and as a creator, a celebrated creator, an international competitor when it comes to things like the Culinary Olympic Games, etc., how his Indigenous background and how a day like today, National Indigenous Peoples Day, fits or factors into his process as a culinary creator. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. And we'll talk restorative justice. We intend to talk about it today with Jessica Buffalo, and that'll be coming up, we expect in approximately an hour. But shows like these are also an opportunity where, so we're figuring out things on the fly, right? And if our team members right now, we're not, scrambling is not the right word, but they are diligently and they are hyper-focused on the task at hand, and we're figuring out what to do. And I said, just throw me on the air. The teeth and hair can take over and talk for a while the experts behind the scenes get the show back on track. And you know what I see this as? I see this as a bit of a gift today, and I see it as a bit of a reminder to us that sometimes the voices that really matter, voices that are very important as parts of or elements of conversations around truth and reconciliation, around what National Indigenous Peoples Day means, around what Canada Day means coming up in what is it, I guess about a week and a half from now. It's the 21st of June today. These conversations a lot of times, I think, lack what we would call in the news business streeters. And streeters are when a reporter will be sent out, and you know how it goes, right? To go out on Robson Street in Vancouver, or they want to go be out, on Dundas in Toronto, or maybe if you're in Calgary, you want to send a camera down to Kensington or Stephen Avenue on a hot summer day. And so you just talk to people about what they think about whatever, whether it's fluoride in the water or a referendum on equalization or National Indigenous Peoples Day. Walk down somewhere where there's a whole bunch of pedestrian traffic, put microphones in front of everyday folks and invite them to have their say and to fuel our perspective and to enrich our perspectives with these types of exercises like streeters. And so today we're going to treat it like that. It looks as though right now, like we might have a little bit more time than we normally do to be able to monitor our live chat and interact with it, to be able to have more relaxed and free-flowing and open-ended and exploratory conversations about what a day like today means to you. And so, I'd like right now, I'm going to be paying keen attention to our live chat as well as our hashtag on Twitter. That's RealTalkRJ. And a reminder that our new Twitter account is out there at RealTalkRJ. So we have the hashtag and the handle now. We'll be paying attention to that, and I'd invite you to let us know what National Indigenous Peoples Day means to you. Brenda's also saying, wishing everybody a happy first day of summer. Today is summer solstice. Or is it? I never really know how. I suppose. What's unfortunate is that there's not just this wealth. Imagine if there was like a thing where I could just type in a question, it would give me an answer. Unfortunately, something like that doesn't exist. I suppose I could have put in the 3 seconds to do the research on this, but instead, I will ask our producer, Sarah Hoyles.
Oh, perfect! I love that.
Summer solstice. Was that last night going into? It's tonight, right? Was it last night going into tonight, or is it tonight going into tomorrow? I think it's tonight going into tomorrow, because the 21st is the longest day of the year, right? So we will have the most daylight today of any day in the calendar year.
Oh, geez, Louise.
So I think we say today is summer solstice.
The summer solstice is traditionally a festive day associated with the beginning of early dawns, late sunsets, and shorter nights.
But I do think that, now here it's showing, I used the World Wide Web, and, summer solstice, otherwise known as estival solstice or midsummer, it occurs when one of the Earth's poles has its maximum tilt toward the sun, and that is summer solstice 2021, Sunday, June 20th. So I do believe that it was last night into today, but I might be wrong. So today's the first day of summer. So that from Brenda as well. So does that come with, is there a sense of renewal or something? Is there something that happens?
A sense of renewal or something. I love that.
But psychologically, because typically if you're going to say a sense of renewal, people would say it would be in the spring. I think, like when the
things come alive.
The daffodils and the tulips are coming up and there's the buds on the trees. But I don't know, when you say, the first day of summer,
I always think,
or summer solstice, is that?
Yeah, there's always North Country Fair, which I would go to. It'd be like, right, this is the mark of the start of the summer.
Yeah.
North Country Fair is a music festival, which is just like it's an all-nighter for multiple nights.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point, isn't it? Yeah. Isn't that the whole point of a music festival?
Well, there's lots of light, so why the heck not?
Yeah. No, I agree. Are you when it comes to the summer? Is there anything quote unquote? This word seems more and more loaded every time you use it.
Oh, I'm interested to know what this word is now.
It's actually a super boring word. By design, the irony is that the word normal can be so explosive these days, because people say there's no normal, and what is normal, and who are you with your normative, but will there be any return to, quote, normal for you this summer? Is there anything going on that people are coming back? Aside from the Calgary Stampede, it seems to me be the only example of anything I can think of that would be a return to, quote unquote, normal. The super spreader event in waiting.
Yeah, just wait. No, I'm truly not going back to normal.
Ever?
Well, for the summer, no. I also I've just started watching on social media how different events are happening and people are live tweeting it, and I'm extremely uncomfortable with going back to normal because normal wasn't working.
Yeah.
And it's just a whole bunch of distraction from what really matters. In my experience, for me, that's what the pandemic has given me, and I'm wanting to kind of almost bottle and keep very close to my heart what the pandemic has given me. I'm scared that I'm going to lose it.
You're scared,
to be honest.
No, that is an honest answer. I was thinking about it.
I'm terrified.
We were talking about this as a family, and I know that. Well, Carrie and I feel a little bit different about this because I can't wait, quite frankly, to go back to hosting events with thousands of people, with all kinds of mixing and mingling, and I just am so excited about that. It is going to feel strange at first.
Will you be shaking hands?
Oh, well, if I'm double vaxxed and everybody's, oh yeah. Are you kidding me?
Hugging?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely 100%.
Wow.
Yeah. But I'm
no judgment. Sorry, the wow was not a judgment.
No,
the wow was just like a wow.
But even if it is a judgment, that's okay. Everyone will be different on this. Some people will continue to wear masks. I was telling you this before. I mean, I've found a certain kind of a security, and like security is not the right word, but like kind of I like being incognito. I like wearing a mask, grocery shopping. I like some of that stuff. I feel like people these days, like people moving forward, and I want to get back on track talking about National Indigenous Peoples Day, but this is, I feel like some people, like, now culture will change. Like we take a look at, like, some Asian cultures where for years and years and years and years and years, if you had the sniffles, first of all, you probably wouldn't go out. Second of all, if you did, you'd wear a mask out of consideration to other people.
Yes.
Imagine that. So, maybe those types of things will change. But yeah, once everybody's rocking and rolling, I would say, like in my mind, that would be, I don't know, like a year from now, when we look back and say, remember that hellish 18 months, remember that, and like hopefully our favorite businesses are still open, and hopefully people's businesses have survived and those and are getting back to some form of whatever, and people are figuring out the new landscape. I would hope at that point to be back to high fives and hugs, 100%. Yeah.
Not to be put a little bit of a kink in this is the idea that modeling is showing that potentially pandemics are going to become more regular.
Yeah.
So,
well, and then
it's going to be that dance that they talk about.
If another one flares up, then we'll go back to not high-fiving and hugging.
Yeah.
And I sure hope so. I just think, how many people are, I just think even of Father's Day, or I think of, birthdays and all the types of things. I had the people close to us, as a matter of fact, in a few circumstances over the past couple of weeks, have lost loved ones, and just the way that people are mourning these days, and it's just, everything is so different. We're always curious to know where you're at, Real Talkers, and how you're sorting things out. You can be in touch with us, of course, to talk at ryanjesperson.com. That's our email address. And then, of course, you can chime in anytime on our live chat or with the hashtag RealTalkRJ. We want to know, if today, National Indigenous Peoples Day, how are you observing it? How are you celebrating it? How are you marking it? How are you wrestling with, at this point, some of the things that I would imagine, I would wager a guess that a whole bunch of Real Talkers are wrestling with, and a whole bunch of Canadians are wrestling with. I talked to a friend of mine by the name of Chris. It was a private conversation, so I won't get too much into it, but we were talking about Canada Day. And he said, because we had our Real Talk, we've been asking people, our unofficial, Twitter poll. And then, of course, this is our question of the week this week. And you can find it at ryanjesperson.com. It's our question of the week presented by our official research and strategy partners at Y Station. If you go to ryanjesperson.com, this year we recognize that Canada Day is going to look a lot different. It's going to look different for a lot of Canadians in light of the discovery of children's bodies at former residential school sites. And in a recent question of the week, we call it our Get Real. Get Real, our question of the week. More than half of you, 54% of respondents, said that you felt differently about your relationship with Canada. And then you expanded on it, many of you, saying, well, you're torn, you're conflicted, or, some of you said you're no longer going to be participating in Canada Day. Our unofficial Twitter poll saw about 1 in 5 people, approximately 20% of our respondents, said that they were intending on canceling Canada Day, which means that 80% intend to, at least in some way, shape, or form, still observe Canada Day. A recent Leger survey of all Canadians, I worded that incorrectly. Obviously, not all Canadians were polled, but a national Leger survey posted a similar result to that question last week, which I always think is interesting. When our polls, how they stack up, our polling, how it stacks up to national numbers. So 57% of Canadians surveyed by Leger said that their relationship with Canada has changed. 54% of Real Talkers. So we're wondering, how will these shifts in perception change the way that you view and participate in Canada's national holiday coming up on July 1st? So that's our question of the week this week. Get real. We invite you to get real at ryanjesperson.com. The poll will take you about 2 minutes, and we look forward to seeing the results of that. So I'm texting back and forth with my pal Chris yesterday, and he's wondering, we're looking ahead to Canada Day. What's your summer look like? Just catching up, having a text exchange, and he says, well, he references the restaurant in Beaumont, Alberta, a restaurant by the name of Chartier. You remember one of the owners of Chartier Darren Chevery was on the show a while back for our hunting roundtable. Chris says, I'm not sure if you knew this, but Chartier is closing down on Canada Day to give their staff the day to reflect. He says, if that's not putting your money where your mouth and values are, I don't know what is. He says, I am also not celebrating Canada Day ever again, and it's been my favorite holiday for years. I love it. Like red and white raspberry cake in the shape of a Canadian flag, love it. Like go to Ottawa for Canada 150, love it. And he's decided to not celebrate again ever. Now, he's a close friend of mine, so I guess in 3 or 4 years I'll be interested to see if he holds to that. But I certainly don't blame anybody. I'm not surprised at all to hear from people right now that are saying, this July 1st is going to be a little bit different for me. So how does National Indigenous Peoples Day factor in? I bet you, I would wager a guess that probably there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Canadians. As a matter of fact, I'm going to say millions of Canadians that today, for the first time ever, will actually be taking the time to meaningfully reflect on what today should mean. And so I would love to hear from you, whether it's on our live chat right now, whether it's on Twitter where you're hitting us up later today, whether it's sending us an email, whenever you feel led, whenever you've chewed on it and walked with it and thought about it, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Nicole says, I think we need to be brutally honest with our children. Nicole says, people like Chris Champion will attempt to teach mistruths or minimize experiences. That's a great commitment. And a good point. Chris Champion, of course, this guy that Jason Kenney hired to write the social studies curriculum for Alberta. He's a residential school denier. We've been talking about him last week. I saw a guy by the name of Edwin Muntz tweet over the weekend. Alberta used to fire teachers like Jim Keegstra, the Holocaust denier. Edwin says now we hire him to write our curriculum. We're going to get into an interview in just 30 seconds from now. I want to quickly remind you that the team at Westworld Computers is powering us up right now. Our technical glitches had nothing to do with the hardware. I can tell you that much. The team at Westworld Computers has had troubleshooting experts and service teams that basically have understood the intricacies and the ins and outs of the Apple lineup, the Macs, MacBook Pros, the iMacs, and everything else for more than 40 years. Family-owned, and now taking appointments to meet with their technicians to bring your gear in at westworld.ca. Of course, they also ship across Canada. They'll ship anywhere, especially if you let them know you're a real talker. Get that extra special white glove treatment. Just leave a note. Just say, yeah, Jespo told me something about the special treatment. They'll love that stuff at westworld.ca. Also want to remind you that our hashtag is powered by the team, the remarkable team at Park Power. I loved on Instagram over the weekend because I follow them. Their Instagram's fantastic. I saw their team was into the Jespo Pisco Sours, which was awesome. Park Power, real community players. They take 10% of their profits every year and put them back into nonprofits in their community. For electricity, internet, and natural gas, visit parkpower.ca and make sure you use that hashtag, or rather the promo code 2021-Real Talk. They'll take $70 off your first bill. All right, let's figure out what this, let's learn what this new Office of Indigenous Languages is all about. This was an announcement made a week ago today. Indigenous people can now apply to reclaim their traditional names on passports and other government ID. Robert Watt and Georgina Liberty are directors in the Office of Indigenous Languages, and we're so grateful that they've made time for us this morning. My new friends, thanks for your patience through our technical glitches on this Monday, and welcome to Real Talk. Georgina, why don't we start with you? For people that have never heard of this Office of Indigenous Languages, relatively new, can you help us understand what it's all about?
Sure. Well, a little bit. It's brand new, of course, like you said. It was just announced on Monday. It has been in the works for a number of years, though. It was part of the reconciliation, the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations. It's an office that's being created for Indigenous peoples to revitalize, strengthen, renew, reclaim Indigenous languages across the country.
So this, Robert, as an answer, I suppose, or in response to Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, I suppose is perhaps extra significant because I think Canadians have been having an important conversation over the past 3 or 4 weeks about why, relatively speaking, there's very little that's been done about that report. Would you concur with that? I mean, do you see this as extra important in light of the fact that there really hasn't been as strong of a response as people would have liked to see?
I think that's just what's happening is that there's a lot of other news going on right now. The children that were found just before the announcement has put a lot of clout in regards to this historic announcement that was made to create this office. I think it's going to be very exciting. I think it's a lot of people still are going to catch up on the news and are going to be pretty excited about being part of this amazing journey that we're going to be part of. It's a 5-year mandate for us that were appointed, so we're very excited. We haven't met yet. We haven't sat down yet to discuss how we're going to plan and prioritize relating to language. So we're supposed to be starting on the 12th of July, I believe.
When we talk about National Indigenous Peoples Day, we're doing everything we can to gain perspectives from across the country, from many different people. And I would love to hear from the two of you when we talk about language, we talk about names, about the importance of that and those traditions. I should mention, Georgina, I mean, you've basically you've dedicated almost your entire life to preserving and protecting your Métis identity and spirit. You in your teens, my understanding is you're working as a researcher already for Manitoba Métis Federation in your teens, right? Tracing the Métis land script. You've been an active member of the Manitoba Métis Federation since 1969. You're the director of Métis Nation 2020 right now. Can you take us into the culture, the traditions of language, why this is such an important initiative through your perspective?
Well, as you know, from my bio, I also am not a speaker of the language, even though my father was a heritage Michif speaker and an elder for our community and a politician back in the early days. And that's part of the reason that I spent so much time and dedicated my life to working with the Métis. But in our culture, it's an oral tradition. It's an oral speaking language. And like many of our Indigenous languages, we learned orally. It wasn't something that was written down. And so when people were busy doing whatever they were doing, it was all in the language. And unfortunately, as children growing up, we didn't speak the language. The only time we did hear it, and that was often, was when all of our relatives were together, and my father would speak with all of his brothers and sisters and cousins and such. But we were, we went to an English school. We were in a community that didn't have a lot of Métis citizens at the time, and so it was really important for me to be wherever my dad was and to be able to work with him and to always be with our people so that I would learn. And I learned a lot about the culture, and I learned about the traditions and everything that pertains to our nation, except for the language. And I feel very sad these days now because my dad is gone and I had the perfect teacher, but I never took the time to learn.
Well, but what a remarkable I would imagine what a personally meaningful opportunity for you right now to participate with this new office.
Absolutely, and I'm very honored and thrilled that I was, the person selected as along with Robert and with Joan as the directors. And we have our work cut out for us over the next few years. But I think that, like Robert said, once we get to have our first couple of meetings and get started and do some planning and do some talking about what our objectives and goals will be, and in line with what the office is set out to do, I think there's going to be some really exciting things happen for us. And we want to make sure that we're on the positive road and that we're making solid decisions based on what we've learned from all of our Indigenous communities.
Robert, when you were, as elected president of the Avatak Cultural Institute about 20 years ago, also co-director of the Inuit Subcommission at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you have visited, I don't know how many Canadian communities. My understanding is that you collected close to 1,000 statements from residential school and intergenerational trauma survivors. What has your personal experience, as well as the experience of hearing this testimony, how has that shaped your understanding of the importance of language and names in the context of truth and reconciliation?
Just to give you an example, we were only surnames. Surnames were introduced to our society back in the 1950s, where there was a traveling RCMP followed by Inuit and going to families. To fit into this family allowance system, people had to have surnames. Some surnames were written down differently in other communities, which they made families not appear that they were related. So it has impacted a lot of policies within Canada has impacted not just our language, but everything related to our society. So language being a big thing. I'm experiencing now that we have Inuit that can't speak Inuktitut anymore either. We have Inuit that are struggling. So with respect to Inuktitut, and we cannot presume that Inuktitut is just one language. There's diversity within Inuktitut. So I've learned a lot through the TRC process, and a lot of people are struggling with their identity. And I believe language and identity go hand in hand.
Absolutely. So, Robert, do you get the sense that when it comes to Inuktitut and the different dialects, or however you may describe it, do you believe that language or a sense of identity that may have been compromised or in some circumstances even lost, do you believe, are you confident that it can be restored? Do you see a future where young children are fluent and understand that language and embrace that language?
We have 4 regions within Canada, 4 Inuit regions. Within the Kativik region, meaning within Nunavik region, we've had a school board where we've been securing languages. I remember when I was 10, 11 years old, my language was not very strong either, but because of development of curricula for Inuktitut, I believe Kativik School Board has done a wonderful job along with Alberta Cultural Institute. They've worked side by side. So Inuktitut's very strong there, but at the same time, we have children that are going to daycare centers now. So there needs to be a strong link between daycare centers and schools, for example. So there's a lot of mechanisms that needs to be strengthened to allow Inuktitut to flourish once again.
This initiative, with the formation of this new office, Georgina, per Federal Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller says, the announcement, the formation of this office, it does not only respond to the TRC call to action back in 2015, that demanded governments allow survivors and their families to restore names that were changed by the residential school system, but it applies to all individuals of First Nations, Inuit, Métis background, potentially affecting hundreds of thousands of people who will have the option to aim to reclaim their identity on official documents. Where do you see this going? I mean, the significance of this, how many people do you expect that there will be a significant response to this, individuals that will take these steps for personal reasons or reasons other than that?
I believe that there will be. I believe that there are people who feel so strongly about reclaiming their names, and I think that whole process is going to take some time, and definitely those who want to go through that process will make the effort and do what is required. Again, it's working within a system that's not typically ours, right? So it'll be interesting to see how it all rolls out and how that process unfolds with all of the different, because now you're talking about national entities that are not familiar with the Indigenous naming or with the Indigenous names and how that whole process works. So it's going to be an interesting process, but I think that for sure now that it has passed, that people will definitely be doing that.
Can you, could either of you, I mean, Robert, maybe I'll put the question to you, but I invite both of you obviously to chime in on this. Can you help us understand how this would work? I mean, I'll be honest, I think many of us are doing our best to get up to speed to understand how, I mean, let me reference Kamloops, as one example. Well, people talk about undocumented graves. People talk about records that were lost or not kept. Records that do exist now, it appears as though there's a certain hesitation to have those records released. Brent Butt, the actor from Corner Gas, said it's time to kick the doors in and take the records. I would be inclined to agree with him. But how much of a challenge or what barriers might exist for people who may say, I, quite frankly, do not know much about my family's background. I don't know what information should be on my passport other than this name that was given to me that's never really truly been mine. I mean, what does that process look like, and how challenging could this be for some people?
Well, from my understanding, I know that the government has been collaborating and consulting with Indigenous organizations. And I can only imagine that they have formulated some kind of mechanism that will allow their people, whether it's Métis, Inuit, or First Nation, to able to have a system in place that will allow them to start that journey. So for us, it's not part of the Language Act to be looking into this. This is all new for me too, but I would hope that there has been proper consultation and collaboration to make this happen. That's all I could say.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Robert. I think that one of the things is that we don't want to lose focus of what our position is and what the role of the Office of the Indigenous Languages is going to be. But I also want to say that, I think that sadly, and my heart goes out to all the families who are trying to discover if they have a family member in the children that were discovered at Kamloops. Sadly, this is not an uncommon story to us Indigenous people. It's a story to Canadians that they didn't hear or didn't know about or didn't see or didn't want to see, and so to us, it's a marking, a time in space where now I think it's wonderful that Canadians are talking about it, and Canadians are starting to realize that there is quite a dark history to all of our good, and like any country, we have our bad and our good, and I think that what we need to do is learn from each other, and we need to learn and be educated, and that's an important piece to our languages, to our naming, to whatever we do.
I think it's funny as you're speaking, Georgina, you're talking about what the do you call it the good and the bad, or the good, bad, and the ugly, maybe, when you talk about a nation's history, when you talk about a nation's relationship with Indigenous people. And I've been sort of trying to evaluate things I see from individuals around me at an individual level, and then things at a community level, which may involve like an initiative to rename a school, or perhaps an opportunity to create some sort of a cultural celebration, or whatever people are doing at the community level. And then there's the federal level. And I think at the individual level today, I'm hoping to wrap by asking the two of you to give every one of our audience members maybe an assignment, or maybe something to think about, something to walk with today. It feels to me, anyway, like this National Indigenous Peoples Day is going to be different than any other. I think for reasons, again, good and bad. Or let me just say, for reasons that are challenging, in a good way. Many people will feel great discomfort today, and will feel discomfort on Canada Day, but it's prompting us to think and to act. So, Robert, what's an assignment for us today? What's something that you would like us, the thousands of people that will hear this podcast, what's something you would like us to walk with or think about or do today on National Indigenous Peoples Day?
That's a very good question. I myself, I'm here in Ottawa, and there's a lot that could potentially trigger me. There's a lot of statues in particular. Statues of colonizers all around me. And there are days where I even just pass them kind of triggers an emotion. So today I told myself that I'm going to go hug a statue today, just for myself. Sometimes it's good to just let go, just breathe, just know that you're alive, and just let go. And I think today's a good day to just let go and be aware that you're part of nature, that you're part of Mother Earth. We're all the same. So let's forget about whether we're Inuit, First Nation, French, Japanese, whatever. We're all human. Thank you.
It's beautiful, Robert. May I follow up and ask, if you had your choice, would every one of those statues come down? Do you have an opinion? You knew I was going to ask you that.
There's a group of ladies near. Well, no, I don't think I can even go to those grounds. I'll figure one out. I have one in mind. I can't say the name, but I have one in mind. If not, I'm going to end up going to that statue and go give. Anyways, none of your business.
None of my business. Hey, you know what? I think that's the first time anybody's ever responded to me that way on this show, and that is a totally valid response. And hey, the show is called Real Talk, and I love it. That's real talk right there. Georgina, let me begin by asking, at risk of just being told it's none of my business, which is true, do you have an opinion on, because we're having this national conversation, we are about, and as a matter of fact, it's an international conversation because America wrestles with its own, and we see that around the world. We saw the Ryerson statue, Edgerton Ryerson statue, come down at the university a few days ago. Edmonton's effigy, the statue of Sir Winston Churchill, had paint splattered on it just a few days ago. We're seeing some schools change names. The city of St. Albert, north of here, is wrestling with whether or not to change the name of an entire neighborhood of Grandin. Do you have a strong opinion on that? I mean, in so many ways, as we're attempting to restore Indigenous languages and cultures, that can go in a number of different ways, can't it?
It sure can. And you know what, I mean, personally, I probably, our opinions are, as Robert said, they are our opinions. And so I don't want to state something nationally that, of how I feel. But I just think that, learning and understanding is our key. And I think that when we start to really recognize the history of Canada and the history of how we got to where we are, let's learn from our mistakes. Take a minute in pause. If you've got that negative feeling coming forward because you see something that really you don't like or you think is not appropriate to Canada's way of life or our, take a minute, pause and learn something. Learn how other people think, how, it always distresses me when I hear, languages, talking about languages. You can go to a store and you can hear, and I don't mean this in any negative kind of way, but you can hear folks talking in their traditional languages. But when it comes to Indigenous people talking in their languages, people take offense to that. And I find that very offending as a Canadian, as a Métis person in this country. Why, we're the people of this land. And so why do people get offended when they hear us talking our language? That's just one of my things. So I just say, pause a minute, take another look, breathe a little bit, and maybe appreciate or go and find out, go and learn before you criticize.
Go and learn. That should be our hashtag from today. Go and learn. I love it. I'm so grateful that the two of you made time for us today. What an important opportunity you have, and I know a meaningful one, as you've outlined for us with this Office of Indigenous Languages. Georgina Liberty, Robert Watt, we're grateful for your time.
That this is just one of 70 plus Indigenous languages you just heard.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's Robert Watt and Georgina Liberty, our guests on this National Indigenous Peoples Day. It's incredible to hear that, isn't it? It's incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate the reminders of how many. He's like, you know, it's not like there's not like just one.
No.
Like, even if you're talking about Inuit languages, Inuktitut, like there's different dialects there. There's different. You remember we were talking about just even last week around the Kootenays, around the former Kootenay Indian Residential School, now converted into St. Eugene's, which is this remarkable development.
Resort, yeah.
And what an amazing conversation. A couple of them last week. A couple of those conversations last week with survivors that have just really, I just feel like I walked through the entire afternoons and evenings just processing what we're hearing. I'm so grateful that so many real talkers are along with us for the ride. But just reiterating there, she's saying, former chief there saying, our language is only spoken by us in this community, nowhere else in Canada, nowhere else in the world. So you look at these knowledge keepers, especially with these oral traditions, and recognize how important it is. I saw somebody on our live chat essentially say, you snuff out a language or you lose a language, you lose culture, period.
Yeah,
Right?
language is culture, culture is language.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciated hearing him speak. And because I don't know that I have ever heard that on the radio waves, ever.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're listening to, I don't know how to say it, but I just feel like it gets siloed. It gets put in like these little tiny boxes, and it's so neat to hear it.
Yeah.
And to me, as the producer on the show, how that lands for me is that's a challenge to me to find ways to integrate it and to have it be a part of the show 365.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the nation's history. It's part of people's history. It's important. And this year we recognize it in a way that I think is very different. I mean, you know, shows that I've hosted for the past 10 or 12 years or 15 years. I mean, we have had content on National Indigenous Peoples Day, but it was always kind of like, oh, neat. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's today. Oh, okay, interesting. You know, people kind of tune in, you learn a little bit. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Now it feels like a commitment. Like I've been reading, you know, on our chat this morning, and, you know, people are just saying basically, you know, how about this from Kim? Says, you know, Orange Shirt Day, and then National Indigenous Peoples Day, and then Canada Day. Says there needs to be continuity of thought, caring, and education tied to truth and reconciliation instead of disjointed days of. And I think that's a great observation.
I mean, when we look at what has been stirred up and having the reckoning now around for settlers around the 215, and the number is continuing to grow. So the numbers just sound so.
I know you want to have names, lists of names. The Watcher says this year it feels cheap to just not have Canada Day, but it should be somber and thoughtful. This year feels similar to Remembrance Day. Everybody just noticed suddenly after so long. I mean, I wonder even like small steps you can take. So people are having conversations. You know, people say, "Oh, I'm going to have my Canada Day barbecue," or "We're still going to gather." But what should we do? What's something you can do? You know what? One thing I was thinking over the weekend. I was thinking even something as simple and doable as a land acknowledgement for people that may have never done that before. But take 30 seconds or 5 minutes. You know, in between everybody getting bombed and shotgunning beers and kids having smokies and the slip and slides out and 2 to 5 minutes. I mean, do whatever you like, but I'm just saying it's very doable and it's very easy to do something as simple as to gather everyone at the celebration, to gather your family or friends, however you're observing it, and to have a moment where you acknowledge. I mean, I'm not like sitting here like I have all the answers. This is just something I was thinking about over the weekend, getting everybody together and saying, hey, everyone, I know that, you know, some of you here today, thank you, you know, John over there. Thank you, Linda over there. I see that you're wearing orange today, or I noticed that orange ribbon on your, or whatever, your orange bandana, or I noticed that. We acknowledge that. We appreciate that. And we wanted to take a second to note that we have mixed feelings today, or our hearts are bruised, or we as a nation are healing, or we're having important conversations, and we want to acknowledge that this barbecue, you know, with under 20 people following all the regulations, doing everything we're supposed to do. That this barbecue is occurring on Treaty 6 or Treaty 7 or Treaty 8, territory, the traditional gathering places of the Nakota Sioux and the Saulteaux and the Tsuut'ina and take that second to do that. And I think that it's not like, is it going to change the world that you do that? No. Is it going to send a pretty clear message to people that you care about and people that care about you? Absolutely. Would maybe somebody for the very first time at that barbecue quietly wonder, Treaty 6, what's the 6 for? I haven't read much about that. I don't know much about that. A friend got in touch with me over the weekend to let me know that she's just signed up for and is participating in the Indigenous, the opportunity for that course at the University of Alberta. It's a free course. It got a big boost when multiple Emmy-winning, award-winning, actor, director, screenwriter Dan Levy, son of the legendary Eugene Levy, of course, took it as part of his personal journey. And when he started talking about it, then the U of A tells us that they experienced just an overwhelming amount of interest in that program. But maybe somebody at your barbecue that hears the land acknowledgement might be prompted to learn a little bit more and enroll in that. And then what happens? The ripple effect of something small, I think, can be big. That's one thing we could do.
Looking at, where are we living? Because land is very much about who we are, where we are. Figuring, and I mean, Edmonton, where we are, the wards have been are now not numbers.
Yeah.
They are given Indigenous names. So learning how to say that. Because, some people can be like, it's hard. I can't, meh.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have to admit that I get scared that I'm going to say it wrong.
Yeah.
And I guess I need to embrace the fact that, oh yeah, Sarah, oh yeah, you're going to say it so very wrong.
Well, we have so much to learn, right?
Yeah.
I always answer back this poor fella. He's done nothing to deserve all of my attention. He's just a young kid. He's an upcoming star with the Edmonton Oilers, but I always respond with a name to any time somebody says, "Oh, my ward name got changed, and how am I supposed?" And I say, "Yesa Puljujärvi." Can you pronounce the name of Connor McDavid's right winger? Can you pronounce the name of the young Finnish winger that skates alongside the best player in the world? Yesa Puljujärvi. If you can pronounce that and it rolls off the tongue, then you can probably learn the name of your ward. Keith says, in Claresholm, Alberta, we use Canada Day in part to celebrate our immigrants, our new residents, and our rural immigration program. Keith invokes a very interesting word here. He says, I think we need to recognize our Indigenous people as well as our new settlers. Interesting word.
Great word. I like that word.
I appreciate that.
It's not a bad word. I love it.
It's not a bad word. Sharon, one of our amazing audience members, Métis heritage, Sharon's shared with us many times, says the language is our culture. We are the language. Crazy James says, this is exactly why, your conversation, Ryan, this is exactly why residential schools, I mean, the nuns there would beat kids when they spoke their language. The goal was to end Native culture. He says they came closer than we realize, and the damage is massive. Heidi says the idea that we're a cultural mosaic is a guise. I was listening to a podcast where they talked about this. We talk about, the United States is a melting pot and Canada is a cultural mosaic. I'm not so sure about that either, Heidi.
I mean, I think that's what we'd like to think of ourselves.
Well, of course it is, but
that's the rewrite.
I think it's the rewrite, right?
Yeah.
I was reading this book. I didn't tell you about reading Danny the Dinosaur with Wyatt the other night. It's like this book was written, I think, in the 1950s. And, it's a long time. I remember reading it growing up. It's a familiar book. It'll be a familiar book to a lot of people. It was written by Sid Hoff in 1958. And I'm going to use a couple unpopular words for a second to make the point, but this is a children's book, and so Wyatt, I don't know if he brought it home from school or brought it home from the library or whatever, but it's in there in the stack of books, and so we settled down to read the other night, and you open it up, and it's like, this is for kids to learn to read, so they read the words themselves, so it's like very simple sentences. It's like, Danny went to the museum, and then it's like, Danny saw Indians and Eskimos, and I'm like, whoa, right? This is like page 2. of this children's book. And like 1958, so at the time, it's like that was the language, people were using that language. But to me, even at that, so I'm reading. So first of all, I edit on the fly.
Good for you.
So I'm like, Danny saw an Indigenous man and a person from the North. And Wyatt, who's 5, is like, he's like sounding out the words, and he's like, where does it say Indigenous? And I'm like, And I'm like, well, kiddo, I'm like, you know what? Like words that we have used, many, many, many years ago when Papa was little, are not words. And so I'm trying to like have this lesson on the fly-ish, and then I sort of talked about, Wyatt is growing up in Edmonton, Alberta. The football team has just changed its name to the Elks. I'm like, even our football team has changed its name. I said, that hat that you have? Well, there's a new, but he's 5, and so you're sort of trying to find that. I know that parents everywhere are trying to find a way to be, and someone will say to me, don't you dare say age appropriate. Nothing's age, what was age appropriate about 3-year-olds' bodies and graves at residential? Yeah. I get it. Trust me. This is the argument. One of the arguments around Alberta's curriculum is like, the fact that residential schools basically don't even show up in this new curriculum until about grade 5. People are saying if a kid is old enough to be ripped from its, her mother's arms and taken to a residential school and subjected to whatever everybody was subjected to there, the horrors of it, then kids these days can learn about it at the same age. I'm inclined to agree. So I'm talking to him about this page in Danny and the Dinosaur and the Indigenous man and, Inuk. And I'm also thinking, but it's bigger than just the language. It's the fact that they're in a museum, which was kind of like, look what we found. Yeah. Like, look what we found and kind of kept. We kind of kept it and we're going to put it in a museum because you won't see any of them anymore looking like this. Right? Like we put them in a museum because we basically did everything we could to ensure that the cultural, whether it's the language or the traditions or the whatever,
food, yeah.
Everything, and I'm not saying whatever in a dismissive way, I'm just saying in an all-encompassing way, that we've done everything that we could as a nation to intentionally kill that.
I believe the word is genocide.
Cultural genocide. And so I'm sitting there thinking, this book, just reading Danny and the Dinosaur, I'm like, this is a major thing here, right? And that's just one example. So I want to know where Real Talkers' heads are at when it comes to National Indigenous Peoples Day. We'll be looking at your emails. Sarah's monitoring our inbox. And, of course, we'll keep an eye on the hashtag as well, the live chat, too. This is an opportunity right now to remind you that the teams at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge know that as the weather gets even better and as summer is now officially upon us, more and more of you are going to be looking to get outside, to take your family out into the great outdoors. This may be, we hope, fingers crossed, the final summer of slight inconveniences and interruptions. The last thing you want to do is experience any of those when you're pulling your trailer, when you're getting your family's coolers and tents and everything out into your favorite place to spend a few days in the great outdoors. The Jeep brand and Ram trucks have both been trusted for decades by Canadians that know that quality time outdoors is the best time you can have as a family or solo. For the best selection of Jeep and Ram, look no further than Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge. Also want to remind you the team at Local Waste always has your back, whether you're a small independent family business or a big player. They want to earn your business. Integrity is their core value. It's why they were sounding the alarm last week about one of their competitors sending out emails that were, well, quite frankly, pretty darn shady. Mikkel and his team at localwaste.ca want you to know that they're here to answer any questions you may have, including steps that could prevent you from entering into bad contracts. They're all about growing your business along with you. You can check them out at localwaste.ca. Of course, today, a day of celebration as well when it comes to Indigenous culture, when it comes to traditions. We are thrilled that Chef Andrew George Jr. has agreed to make time for us today, a member of the Wet'suwet'en Nation in British Columbia, a participant in the first all-Indigenous team at the Culinary Olympic Games in Frankfurt, Germany. Chef George Jr. was head chef at the four-host First Nations Pavilion at the 2010 Winter Olympic Games in Vancouver, BC. Chef, welcome to Real Talk, and thank you so much for making time for us today.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me.
When it comes to National Indigenous Peoples Day, we'll talk about your perspective as a chef, of course, today, but just as a person, as a human being, did today feel different? Did you wake up with a different thought process today than yesterday or than you will tomorrow?
Oh, very, very much so. I think what's transpiring in the world is definitely a wake-up call. I think what happened in the Kamloops Secwepemc territory, it has been a long time coming, and hopefully through all of these processes, the truth will come out and we can start moving towards reconciliation. Because one thing is you cannot deal with reconciliation without knowing the truth.
Yeah, so very well said. That's a message that we continue to hear here from so many different guests on the show, and wrestling with that truth, I hope, is a commitment that people will be making today. Do you have plans personally, or will you be observing today in any particular way?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The place where I work at, the Industry Training Authority, is acknowledging the 250 children this day. We are acknowledging the people of the Secwepemc residential school and stand in solidarity with them. So we put together a series of videos for our staff to watch today and educate them more regarding, first of all, Indigenous Day, where it came from, and a little bit more talk about the residential schools and basically creating a dialogue why all this happened.
You, I guess it was coming up on 10 years ago, you were part of a delegation of chefs from 25 different countries around the world. This was a U.S. State Department initiative called Culinary Diplomacy, promoting cultural understanding through food. We've had a great conversation today already talking about the importance of language when it comes to cultural traditions. Will you take us into cultural understanding through food?
Yeah, perfect. And I appreciate that, because this is where I think it's really critical about food and the commonalities that we have throughout the world is food. And by participating in such a wonderful event in 2012 on the culinary diplomacy was a process of breaking bread. Breaking bread with chefs from all over the world, different backgrounds, very diverse group. And to me, that's where this all starts. It is a dialogue through food and an understanding of each other. And to me, once we do that, I think it's a much better world, because I think every nation on this planet has something to offer. I think overall, participating in such an event really gives you the opportunity to actually promote your culture through food, which is actually quite a way to do it. And when you sit at a table with 25 other chefs from all around the world and breaking bread and sharing the plate that you brought from Canada and having a dialogue with them and finding out the commonalities that we all have and the wishes that we all have, which was to basically live at world peace.
Do you did you present one dish? If it was just one, would you tell us all about it? I would love to hear about which one you put in front of your colleagues from around the world.
We did a couple of events, and the one I did in the Napa Valley was a juniper duck because of the use of a red wine. So basically, it's a smoked duck breast that I do and create a wonderful sauce out of juniper berries. And what I do is I debone the duck and take the bones and make a demi-glaze with it, which is quite a process. But then you put your duck breast in the smoker and nice lightly smoked, and then I seared it on a barbecue. And then you create a wonderful sauce with juniper berries, some red wine, and then you add your demi-glaze, and you nappe it over top of the duck. And it has the juniper berry actually has such a wonderful complement to the duck. It's probably one of my most favorite dishes I do. In another area we did in New York City, I did a braised buffalo rib with red pepper pesto, which again is basically paying homage to the buffalo herds in the Great Plains.
I'm not sure why I'm asking a chef to describe these fabulous meals while I've not even had breakfast yet. It's fascinating to listen to, and my imagination's absolutely running wild on what that must taste like. I can't even imagine. Your first cookbook, chef, published in 2010, A Feast for All Seasons, and you followed that up in 2013 with a very popular modern native feasts. Before we start getting into what drives your process today, or in putting these recipes together, would you help us understand, as a young person, where your awareness or appreciation of the culinary arts and traditions came from?
I think a lot of this came from me growing up off reserve and observing the very different lifestyle that we had. But growing up off reserve and growing up very traditionally, because we didn't grow up on the reserve, we had to basically live off the resources on the land. So that's how we grew up. Grew up fishing, trapping, hunting, gathering, and cooking some very simplistic foods, but actually very delicious. So, as everybody knows, probably the greatest chef in the world is your mother. So I take that in great pride on what my mother taught us how to cook. And again, growing up not being the richest family in the world, what she produced when you actually didn't see anything, but she'd come up with some absolutely wonderful meals and very tasty. That really played with my mind, but not only that, because our food is actually very, very healthy. Our food is known as medicine. So it's preventative medicine. And by learning how to cook through my mother and my grandmother, and the nutritional properties in the food that we produced, I thought it was a wonderful way to actually get into the cooking world, promote our culture through food, and bring it to the world stage, which we did, like you mentioned, in the 1992 World Culinary Olympics, and began at the world stage at the 1986 World Expo in Vancouver, and again at 2010 Olympics in Vancouver.
You're talking about like some of the highest profile events. I mean, the World Expo, the Olympic Games. I mean, these are some of the highest profile events in the world. What did that mean to you as an Indigenous person to be there representing your culture on such an enormous and prominent stage?
Well, it was very hard to witness because of the world I came from. So when you look at it that way, I seen it as an opportunity to see the world through my forefathers' eyes. And when you talk about that, where I came from off reserve, education was forefront for us growing up. Even though we were traditional people, we were taught to take education, a traditional education and a Western education, and pursue not just a job, but a career. And so I took the path of a tradesperson and became a cook and then eventually a chef. But again, it was all based on foods. And then when I actually went to these events and had a look around me, and particularly the 1992 World Culinary Olympics, where there was 15,000 cooks from 52 countries all over the world, I thought to myself, what a wonderful opportunity for a lot of our youth to participate in something like this and promote their culture. And it's been 25 years and it's actually working. At that time when I went to the Olympics, I felt so alone. But nowadays, through all the trades training at the Industry Training Authority where I work, and through all of the chefs here in British Columbia that are training Indigenous youth, I'm happy to say there is a lot of talented upcoming youth coming through the system, including my son, who is a third-year apprentice. He's doing fantastic. We're doing a show with the Nature of Things coming up, a documentary on the cycle of the salmon based on our traditional food. And hopefully he'll take his rightful place in the apprenticeship world along with everyone else to promote our Indigenous food. So that's what I've seen when I participated in these events is an opportunity.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, Chef. We talked earlier today just about whether or not there's optimism from these directors of the Office of Indigenous Languages that language and culture can be essentially reintroduced, or that the next generation of young people will have that thirst for knowledge and the desire to reconnect with their culture. And that's pretty incredible to hear you talking about what you're seeing from young, up-and-coming Indigenous chefs. What do you think is driving that? Do you sense a real hunger from them Pun unintended, but it works, I guess. Is this based on a cultural reconnection, do you think?
Yes, and I'd actually beg to differ on that. It's not really a reconnection or reinventing. It's always been there.
Yes.
The elders from the residential schools, and particularly my mom, who is a residential school survivor, held on to the past and their knowledge through stories. And it still exists today. And my mom brought us through what they went through in the residential school system, what we witnessed through colonialism, through going through elementary school, high school, and then post-secondary school, and held on to the culture and the language. And she's not the only one, and it was preserved. But what I'm saying here is our parents purposely kept us from speaking our language to protect us. Back in that time, when I'm talking about the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but nowadays, the youth are very, very strong on the language and culture, which is actually fantastic to see, because our people fought so hard to hang on to that. Because when you take away language, food, it takes away a culture and an identity of who you are. And that's why we stand strong, is an identity. And when I was listening to some of your podcasts about acknowledgement, I think it's got to go a lot further than just a simple acknowledgement. It has to go down to acceptance. When you accept a person of who they are, it opens doors. And talk about reconciliation and building a new world and moving in that direction. So that's my thought on that one.
You're so right, Chef. I mean, you even look at this is unrelated but related. But you look at the words that people used to use around, minority communities, or I would even say, for example, like we're here in Pride Month as well. And when it comes to the LGBTQ2S plus community, even people would use the word tolerance. And I remember the first time that I heard somebody say it's not tolerance. Tolerance is the word you use when, like, your neighbors have their stereo turned up too loud and you say, I will tolerate it for now. Tolerance is not the word, right? Love or acceptance is the word.
Yes, and I appreciate that, because what I get out of it now, this generation, not only just the Indigenous generation, I see this generation across the board as making a statement right now, right through Black Lives Matter, the Asian community, the Muslim community, the Indigenous community. And what I'm hearing from the youth is enough's enough. This generation is very educated. They're going to make a stand, and it gives me hope in humanity. And hopefully this continues, because they know how to treat each other. And maybe the older generation should take a lesson out of these younger ones that are making a stand. My daughter is one of them, and she's extremely frustrated the world on how we treat each other, and it shouldn't be that way. And I know she's right along with her peers. I see that they all think alike, and it's really good to see that they're all standing together.
So well said, Chef. When you've had, I mean, these opportunities you described to create in front of and to obviously demonstrate your abilities and share your culture with chefs and other people from around the world at these amazing events, have you noticed when you talk about Indigenous cuisine, let me say, I'm trying to, like, avoid using a phrase that would be offensive, because I know if I say Indigenous Canadian cuisine, people say won't prefer it. But I guess what I'm saying is from Indigenous people that are demonstrating cuisine or sharing cuisine, in the territories and the lands that we know now as Canada. Let me put it that way. When you compare, you describe not just the nutritional benefit, but when you describe food as medicine, which I think is just an amazing concept, and it's what would certainly set that cuisine apart. Do you see similar trends from Indigenous chefs that would be indigenous to, whether we're talking about Indonesia or parts of Africa? When you look at traditional cuisines from around the world, is there something that sets your traditions or your people's traditions apart? Or do you find common themes and threads when it comes to Indigenous cooking from around the world?
I think, and that's a very good question, because when you look at the Indigenous world all around the globe, our food is based on sustainability and freshness. And that's what I see today. It's such a wonderful opportunity for the world to experience the brand new cuisine that has actually always been here. And when you look at Indigenous cuisine, whether it's from Canada or one of our nations here in British Columbia, whether it's Wet'suwet'en or Tahltan or Squamish, it is fresh. And when you're talking about traditional food and Indigenous food, it is beyond organic. And to me, that's what we look at. And I'm very excited about today's generation of chefs, because they have a very different outlook on food than we have. I was trained in the old French cuisine way, which I'm very proud of, but today's techniques are very different, and the ingredients are very different because they're very fresh, very uncomplicated recipes that you can very easily follow. But when you get down to the food itself, it is very healthy. It's an excellent way to produce it, and it's very, very fresh. So I'm actually very excited about the new food that's coming onto the scene. It's basically a world cuisine now.
Yeah. Do you have, is there one thing in particular? I feel like you've shared so much with us here, and your insights are so valuable. Is there one thing, before I thank you for your time, is there one thing that you wish people knew more about or understood more about Indigenous cuisine? I feel like you describing it as medicine, talking about that's obviously a huge part of it. But
I think when you look at Indigenous food, I think it's very entrenched in culture, because everything that we do with our food has a meaning, and it's all based down to respect. It goes right into our feast halls, and when we talk about nurturing our people in our feast hall, we look at everything as a gift from what we call Hudaki, the higher power. So there's such a massive connection to the land, and everything that we take from the land, something is put back. So there's a big respect to that. So to me, that's what I think the world has to know. It's not just a food. It's not just cooking. That's actually a way of life. And when you look at the people from the Alaska Panhandle all the way down to Oregon, we all live the same life. It's the cycle of the salmon. And that's why the salmon is so important to our people. That's why the farm salmon affects our people, because when you look at a farm salmon versus a wild salmon, when you look at a wild salmon, that's who we are. It identifies who we are, and it's a way of life. And that's why we fight so hard for our salmon, because that's who we are. We are the salmon people.
I've just started to learn. I've really tried to deepen my understanding of the implications of all these salmon hatcheries on the West Coast and the impact it's having on Indigenous communities and the health of the wild salmon. It's a fascinating. I'm really looking forward to that Nature of Things documentary. We'll keep an eye out for that. You don't have any sense of what that production schedule looks like, do you? You just know you're doing interviews with your son for that?
No, we're starting the shooting on July long weekend.
Okay.
In Woodsit, which is the Morristown Canyon, and it'll be aired in September on CBC, and then on GEM CBC for about 145 countries around the world.
That's an amazing opportunity there. Chef Andrew George Jr., author of A Feast for All Seasons and Modern Native Feasts, a huge deal when it comes to the culinary scene across the country here, a member of the Wet'suwet'en Nation in British Columbia. We're so grateful for your time and insight. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you very much, and happy Indigenous Peoples Day to everybody out there. And please take time for yourself, and please educate yourself about the issues regarding the residential school. And at the end of the day, take care of each other. Thank you very much.
Beautifully said. Thanks so much, Chef. That's Chef Andrew George Jr. There's a common theme in the conversations we're having today. Take time, right? Listen, learn, understand, reflect. I mean, that's been what we've been hearing from every single guest today, and I'm so grateful for that. We do want to note that if you were looking to hear from Dr. Michael Hart, Vice Provost for Indigenous Engagement at the University of Calgary, we're going to reschedule that interview. We're not only going to be talking about or having these types of conversations on National Indigenous Peoples Day. Let's be very clear about that. These conversations will continue, and we'll look forward to that. In just a second, we're going to talk to Jessica Buffalo, who's a lawyer with Legal Aid Alberta. We're going to talk about There's a new event, as a matter of fact, coming up on Thursday. It's an online event, which will make it way more accessible to people. But let's better understand Indigenous people and the law. What does restorative justice mean? Why do we need Indigenous courts? What is the reference to Gladue? We're going to understand that better in just a moment. Right now, I wanted to remind you that you have an opportunity, and we're going to be talking about this tomorrow with a lot of workplaces, a lot of organizations talking about allyship, talking about inclusion. The team at Power Ed, presented by Athabasca University, has a course custom tailored to help you broaden your understanding and expand your skill set when it comes to this. Check this out right here at powered.ca. You can see it on my screen. You can sign up here. These are online, on-demand courses. You learn at your pace. You learn at your convenience. Some of these courses, like Digital Wellness 101, it's like a 2 to 3 hour time frame to complete it. Some of them are more along 5 or 6 hours. But the point is, it's not this monstrous, massive commitment. You can understand more about allyship and inclusion by taking the time to invest in yourself, invest in your experience, and in what you'll be bringing to your home, your friend circle, or your workplace. Again, at powered.ca. Also, big shout out to the teams at Eden Landscaping. We check in with our partners from time to time. I ask Mike how he's doing. He's like, man, we are pedal to the metal right now. They've got all their crews out. This is the exciting time, right? I mean, yeah, sure, they sit down with their clients through the year, especially the winter and spring months when everybody's looking out the window, imagining what the trees will look like again once they have leaves on them. Right, once all the annuals pop up, or the perennials pop up and the annuals are installed. See, I figured out the difference there. I'm pretty proud of myself there. That's where my but it doesn't make sense. I mean, perennial makes sense, but the annuals, wouldn't you think that they come up annually? Anyway,
I totally agree with you.
Annually is when you annually go shopping for
That's
your
right.
annuals.
And you shell out lots of money.
Yes, and if you sound like me when you try to talk about gardening and landscaping, it's time to visit landscapeedmonton.ca. The team at Eden Landscaping has been helping people like me who can talk a bit of game but have virtually near zero knowledge, still have beautiful outdoor spaces. How do you like that? That's kind of like it's like a long stumbly tagline, but it works.
It works.
If you're one of those people that can talk a bit of game but actually
don't
have a green thumb, have no idea. Two brown. No, that sounds rude.
No.
We're not going there. Back it up and take the exit to landscapeedmonton.ca. Today, when it comes to conversations around Indigenous people and where the country needs to move, initiatives that are not just important but imperative, a lot of people will be talking about restorative justice. It's been an ongoing conversation for quite some time. That's why Legal Aid Alberta is hosting this Thursday at noon Mountain Time, 2 p.m. Eastern, online. You can check out legalaid.ab.ca. Indigenous People and the Law, a guide to restorative justice and Indigenous courts. Jessica Buffalo, kind enough to make time for us this morning, a lawyer with Legal Aid Alberta. Welcome to Real Talk, and may I say a happy National Indigenous Peoples Day to you, Jessica. We appreciate you making time for us.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on. And also I'd like to say a happy National Indigenous Peoples Day, and also acknowledge the territory that I work and live on, Treaty 7 and Métis Region number 3.
Appreciate that. Why don't may I start by getting a bit personal, and then we'll get professional. What does National Indigenous Peoples Day mean to you personally?
Well, it's a day that I celebrate who I am. Me and my family have some plans later on in the day, but it's something I look forward to every day, every year. And it brings awareness to who we are as a people. And it's a way for us to share our culture with the rest of Canada.
Wonderfully said. Can you take us into when we're talking about restorative justice? We'll get into details, but overarching when it comes to the theme of this, or what we endeavor to do, or why this is important, can you help us understand restorative justice and what it means?
Yeah, so restorative justice, the first part of restorative is restore. And so it puts the individual in a place to repair that harm that they committed with their criminal behavior, and also puts them, at the wheel to heal. And that's what one of the initiatives the Calgary Indigenous Court looks at. So it's restorative justice with a healing component.
So how different is, I mean, how much of a transformation would this represent? Like when we talk about Indigenous court, how different is that from, the way things have been done for so many years?
Well, these courts weren't designed for Indigenous people. And this court is designed for Indigenous people. And it looks at repairing that overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the criminal justice system, the over-incarceration, and it focuses on healing. So when a person comes into the court, they have to do an intake and they have to be ready to heal. And whereas in a regular stream court, they could just go through, plead guilty, get their punishment, and be on their way. We focus on the factors that brought them to the court in the first place and try identify them and then try to repair them so that the individual does not come back before us again.
So what have you seen? I mean, is there enough track record here for you to be able to say, hey, based on the numbers, based on essentially data-based analysis, this is working?
Well, we don't have the statistics yet. The court opened its doors in September of 2019. But even during the pandemic, the amount of success that we have seen with our individuals, the amount of graduations that we have identified, our wait list for blanket celebrations for these individuals is huge. So there is a need for these types of courts, and there is a demand as well.
Can you tell us about the significance of the blankets and the celebrations?
Yeah, so it's traditionally an Indigenous ceremony that used to be done with the buffalo robe, and it was to honor warriors, honor individuals who have accomplished a huge feat. So that moved into a blanket once the buffalo robe sort of ran out. And we use that in the court, except we don't call it a ceremony, we call it a celebration, just because practicing ceremony in court is not something that's, we've really spoken about in length.
So this is, it sounds to me, my understanding is that there's an important voluntary element here. In other words, an individual needs to feel, compelled personally to participate in this. What are you seeing at an individual level from people that endeavor to become involved with this program or this approach to restorative justice?
Well, what we were seeing before is that people were taking responsibility for their actions. They were wanting to plead guilty, but there wasn't any mechanism in place to help identify those needs. So it's not a matter of people not wanting to take responsibility. They are fully able to do that. But now, instead of them just getting a criminal record and being on their way, we're actually assisting them with preventing further criminal records from happening or, preventing them from going to jail.
Jessica, what would you say to a person that may have limited understanding of Indigenous court or of the premise behind it, maybe limited understanding of how it works, that maybe, for the person that's a black and white type thing, it's crime and punishment, you got to do your time, big fans of mandatory minimums, this sort of frou-frou approach where we're not putting people behind bars, it's just not going to work. What would you say to a critic like that?
Well, in 1999, the Supreme Court of Canada decided under R. and Gladue that the Indigenous background needs to be taken into consideration of the Indigenous offender, and all alternatives to jail must be explored. That was about 21 years ago. Since that slap on the wrist that people think has happened, the statistics for Indigenous offenders have gone up every single year. So these courts are needed in order to prevent that, because the harm that is caused on society by continuously sending individuals to prison and having them come out, it's not going to benefit anybody, not the offender, not the community. So in a way, this is beneficial for everybody because it's repairing the harm done to the community, repairing the individual, and also repairing the communities that they come from. And this all stems from the Gladue test. And the individuals have to understand that judges must take this into consideration. And despite that, statistics keep rising.
When you describe, you said it just a couple of minutes ago, you said people want to take responsibility for their actions and so they'll plead guilty. Do you think that there may be are there other contributing factors to an early guilty plea? Are there trust issues when it comes to the court? Do a lot of people just want to get out of there?
Yeah, and especially if this individual has been institutionalized from a very young age, if they're apprehended by Child and Family Services, if they lived in group homes, they know the game. And so they want to get out of it as soon as possible. They know that they're going to be, if they're going to not plead guilty, they may be held without bail for 2 or 3 weeks. And so they know that if I do this now, I can get out and be on my way. But what you see is that impacts them down the road, because let's say they take responsibility for a crime they didn't commit. Well, let's say 3 years down the line, they actually do commit that crime. Punishment is going to jump. And that jumping is what is going to cause them to be in the system and not be able to get out.
Jessica, may I ask about your own personal heritage and how it impacted or influenced, if in any way, your choice to practice law?
Yeah, so I'm Cree. I'm from Samson Cree Nation, located in Muskwachees. And sorry, I went into law school to assist my people. And I thought I was going to go into land claims and treaties. But I had the ability to go into the Indigenous community legal clinic at UBC, and that just changed my perspective. My first sentencing was done at Indigenous Peoples Sentencing Court. And just the change that I saw in that individual, he completely turned his life around. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to help my people get out of this cycle of abuse, break the trauma, basically.
And how many years ago was that? And what has your experience since then been like with regards to, what you believe is possible and what motivates you and what drives you?
That was 6 years ago. So then I moved to Calgary and started working at Calgary Legal Guidance. And I started working with the legal clinic at the Indigenous Hub. And then as soon as I heard about the Calgary Indigenous Court being started, I made sure that I volunteered and was part of the planning for that. And these courts and the glad-do factor has been so dear to my heart. And I want to ensure that Indigenous people are elevated from these positions, and the over-incarceration of Indigenous people stops, and the over-representation of them even in the criminal justice system is diminished.
We had really interesting conversations a couple of years ago as part of this Me Too movement, where I think that judges came under serious scrutiny when it came to how many of them had tried, people facing charges around sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, and then including in sentencing, how some of the comments that judges would make, et cetera. And there were some pretty high profile examples of judges, including in Alberta, that really, I think, gave people pause to think. When it comes to the education or the awareness of the depth of understanding that you see from the on the bench, let me say, yourself as a lawyer with Legal Aid Alberta, do you believe that when it comes to the judicial system, are the judges up to speed enough, either on the glad-do factors or even more generally speaking?
I can't speak for all of Alberta, but I know the Calgary bench is amazing. I know that you will be well supported if you are appearing in front of a Calgary judge. The Calgary court has almost indigenized other courtrooms, and so they will talk about healing plans. Have you done your healing plan? Or they will sort of use the models that we're using in CIC in the regular stream courts, and we're starting to see that, and that's very. I love it, because these specialized courts, the glad-do courts, should not exist. All courts should run and operate this way. So if they are going to move towards that way and these specialized courts no longer need to exist, that means that we've accomplished what we were trying to accomplish.
What's the work that is undone? I mean, when it comes to the to-do list, what is right at the top as far as you understand it?
The to-do list. There's a lot there.
I bet.
Well, one of the things you mentioned earlier on, mandatory minimum sentences. I mean, those are something that still need to be addressed. Bill C-22 has been brought in, though, to sort of decrease that. But the mandatory minimum sentences and the starting points still have a huge impact on how Indigenous offenders are treated, and those need to be reconsidered.
We've been asking our guests through the morning before we thank them for their time, and I know you've got a bunch that you need to get to today, Jessica, we're grateful that you're here. We've been asking our guests to give us something to walk with today, or to give us something to think about, or even a step to take, a call to action on National Indigenous Peoples Day. I know I may be putting you on the spot, but I suspect that you'll be able to issue a challenge to our audience on this very unique day.
Well, I challenge you to just show respect and show the grief that you felt for those 215 children that were found in Kamloops Indian Residential School, and understand that a lot of those children did come home, and with them they brought huge trauma. And so we're asking for time to heal, time for respect. And today is one of the greatest days that you can start implementing that.
Beautifully said. Jessica Buffalo is a lawyer with Legal Aid Alberta. We want to let you know. Actually, Jessica, before we sign off, why don't I get you to tell our audience a little bit about this? So this event's coming up on Thursday. That's this Thursday, June 24th, a few days from now, from noon to 1 p.m. Mountain Time. It's an online event. You can learn more at Legal Aid Alberta. That's legalaid.ab.ca. You'll be able to find the link to the event there. It'll be featuring you. You'll be speaking there along with Grace Auger, a lawyer, and Justice Navigator Stephen Shirt. Can you tell us about Thursday's event?
Yeah, it's going to be about restorative justice and Indigenous people. So we'll be talking in depth about Calgary Indigenous Courts, Siksika and Tsuut'ina Courts, as well as, racism that's prevalent in the law and how to move forward.
Okay, and it's open to the general public, anybody that wants to check it out?
And it's free.
And it's free. Love it. Jessica, thank you so much for this, and a happy National Indigenous Peoples Day to you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, anytime. That's lawyer Jessica Buffalo here in the context of her role with Legal Aid Alberta. Lisa says, this also highlights this conversation. Lisa's watching us live on YouTube. Thanks for being here, Lisa, and everybody else. It says, this really also highlights the importance of things like preventative measures, addressing factors and issues that lead Indigenous people to be disproportionately involved in the justice system, right? Housing, health, education, and so many other factors, which is such a great point.
And as Jessica mentioned, trauma.
Yeah. It's, I heard this is like really oversimplifying it, but you hear people talk about the impact of residential schools, and Jessica makes such a good point that many of these children went home. But, these children go home, their parents were traumatized, like their kids were taken from them, right? And then these kids, you can't say students, these kids, I mean, you can say students, but it's just, I go back to what Jagmeet Singh said. I know I keep referencing it, but he's just, in plain language, the leader of the federal NDP says it just feels weird to call them schools because they were so much more horrific than what you would, expect a school to be. The fact that there's a graveyard outside nearly every one of them, if not all of them. But these students come home with really having the culture beaten out of them, taught, counseled, or beaten out of them. And then you expect these young adults to now understand, like with serious trauma, PTSD, et cetera, to understand now how to parent. And basically what you did was you took out like an entire, you just drove this wedge, this massive, devastating, it's like driving a stake in an attempt to kill the culture of hundreds of different communities, of hundreds of thousands of people. And that trauma and the healing and the understanding of it, everyone is so eager, or many people are so eager to be able to, let's just get past this. Let's just get over this.
Moving on.
Let's put this behind us. Let's move on. Let's understand what we need to do to move on. And the theme that I'm picking up on from the dozens of people that we've been talking to in the past number of weeks is that it's time right now to sit, to listen, to think, and to understand. But as a culture and as people, we're so driven to be like, okay, and then when? So when does the listening stop, and when do we move on? Like, what's the deadline for the end of the listening? And then so when we can start with the healing, and then when are we done with the healing? So then we can all move on, right? And it's just, that's not going to be the case.
And I think, as a culture, like big Canadian, North American culture, to sit with oneself and to sit in your feelings, people will do anything but do that. It's very uncomfortable to sit with yeah,
It's kind of the point.
And precisely.
You know,
and so when
feel
people
the
are like, I
discomfort.
can't meditate, my head always goes all over the place.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's like,
the point.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you're supposed to watch it and then bring it back
Mm.
and watch it. And so, yeah, this whole idea of sitting with it, sit with the discomfort.
Heidi says the idea of restorative justice versus, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's is it the root of, or it's one of retribution, retributive, retributive. Why can't I say the word? Justice matters so much. The wise person might say, Ryan, pick messages you can pronounce and read if you'd like to on the show.
But I think that point is, it's part of the Indigenous cultures, I should say, where it is about community and it is about bringing an individual back in. It's not about leaving them out, putting them out. They are now out forever. They're not allowed to be a part of our community anymore.
So here's real talk. You know, real talk is also that a lot of people will think that this is absolute malarkey, right? The real talk is that some people are going to say, if somebody stole from me or allegedly did this or was convicted of doing that, they should pay the price. And they should sit in a cell with no cable TV and they should think about what they did. You know, and it should be, you know, you stole my whatever, or you did this to me or that. And that should be 7 years behind bars and a criminal record, and learn your lesson. And once you learn your lesson, you know, then you won't do it again because you don't want to go back to jail. And then someone says, yeah, but that guy that stole your snowmobile, you know, did you hear that he's going through this restorative justice thing where he's, you know, tapping back into his culture and better understanding? And some people will say that's horse shit. What, tapping into your culture? Like, are you kidding me?
Tap into this.
Yeah, why don't you tap me? You know, next time you come out, you know, and then, right? I mean, it's not like every single person is going to be on board with this type of idea, which is why I think that conversations with lawyers and advocates, change makers like Jessica Buffalo are important. Like, and also where I think that proof of performance is also important. Now, she says, listen, this is, you know, the Indigenous courts haven't even been open for 2 years yet. So it's
added a pandemic in the middle,
et cetera,
of it.
et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. But I bet you that with a meaningful commitment to this, 10 years down the line or 15 years or 20 years down the line, to be able to say, as we have invested as people, as we have invested in these, I mean, this is a ruling all the way up to the Supreme Court, as she points out, the Gladue principles. This is, you know, we have made a meaningful contribution to this, and now look. Like, I don't know Arnold's family's story, but I do know that Arnold on our live chat says my brother participated in a type of restorative justice when he was in trouble with the law, and it really changed his perspective on society and the law, says Arnold, and he never reoffended. Anecdotal, yep, but that's one person's experience.
When we talk about, you know, what's the data we need to wait for data to come in, I think we can also look at, well, what has the performance been of the current system? And we're seeing, as Jessica noted, a continual increase. So I would say, like, how is that, you know, law and justice and order, how's that working for us?
It's like the war on drugs. It's like
precisely
all types of things, right? It's like I don't mean to get too, I was going to say it's like the long gun registry. It's like, I don't mean to start invoking all these cans of worms and adding them to the mix, but you're right. We take big steps and people will say that doesn't even work. That doesn't work at all. Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, you know, what was it? Just say no, or dare to say no, whatever it was called, the DARE program. Like, how well did that work? America's been losing the war on drugs for, I mean, arguably more than 200 years, but more in particular, you know, it's time to take, but it's hard for people to wrap their minds around these types of things. Like, I promise I won't get too off track, but when you start talking about, for example, the war on drugs and the opioid crisis, it's why it's so important to have governments. I mean, my heart's broken over the course of the weekend. People should follow Dr. Elaine Hishka on Twitter. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to look it up right now so I can show a graph to those of you that are watching on YouTube. And of course, if you're listening on the podcast, I'll just describe for you what we're going to see here. But, I mean, it's tragic. And the number of preventable deaths, and this is just in the province of Alberta, over the past 3 months is absolutely off the charts. And I mean, look at this. So says Dr. Hishka, who's just an amazing advocate and as mentioned, a professional here in the field. Alberta quietly updated the substance use surveillance dashboard. This is a resource that's available online. She provides the link to it if you'd like to check it out. She's at Hishka on Twitter, HYSHKA. We lost another 109 people to preventable drug poisoning deaths in April. So that's 3 a day, approximately. Preventable drug poisoning deaths in April, just in Alberta. Now, I want you to look at this. So this was sent on June 18th. This was a few days ago. And if you look at where they start to spike, like where do they start to spike? I mean, they're really, it's really difficult to see these numbers. They go back to 2016. And these are, again, Sarah, you talk about numbers and how cold it feels to just list numbers. These are people. These are sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. These are people. These are humans. But where does it spike? Like the numbers spike from 97 deaths, which is horrific, in 1 month in May of 2020, and then they spike to 137 the next month, then 132, then 158, then 116, and they're way up. And you look at those spikes, and guess what those spikes correlate with? Those spikes correlate, those are in direct correlation to the withdrawal of funding, the withdrawal of supports, the closure of supervised consumption sites. So this all comes back to having the confidence of elected officials and community leaders that listen to data and evidence and science. And this brings us back as well to the conversation about restorative justice. If the case can be made, if the Supreme Court has ruled on the importance of something culturally and otherwise, I believe that it's important as individuals to be able to get behind a program or an approach or an initiative that may seem somewhat unconventional, that has wisdom behind it and that has the potential or even the promise of making meaningful strides in areas that demand to be addressed, such as the disproportionate representation of Indigenous people incarcerated or involved in the Canadian justice system, right? I mean, the numbers are absolutely disproportionate. It demands to be addressed. And so we need to have these types of conversations. Whatever you think the solution is, we would love to hear from you. You can email us anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. That's the best way to make sure that we're going to see your message. We love the live chat. We love those of you that use our hashtag RealTalkRJ, but sometimes there's just a lot of activity on there, and it's easy for us to lose track. Before we get into positive reflections, before we sign off, I want to recognize a new team member of ours that has done an absolutely remarkable job. She will be now making her official on-camera debut as our technical producer, Sam Brooks, has taken a few days away to be with his family. We have been so lucky to be hanging out with Emily Bashinsky, right? Bashinsky, who's just nailed it, including a hell of a morning on the troubleshooting front. Nothing to do with you. You were just dynamite today.
Well, thank you.
How were your first couple days on board the Real Talk train?
It's been a really wonderfully steep learning curve, but I like a challenge. I think the one thing I've noticed is I could probably stand to supply some sort of just pillow for me to scream in on days like today.
Oh, yeah.
It's a treat. So thanks for having me here.
Can we get a branded pillow?
Yeah, we could get actually a branded screaming pillow. Might actually be a phenomenal idea.
I think quite a few people would go for that.
We could
reading Twitter, a bit annoyed.
It would help me.
The Real Talk screaming pillow.
It might help me make up for a previous pillow endorsement that I had for several years, where I promoted a certain company that had certain ownership ties to a certain president of the United States. I would appreciate a do-over on that. I would appreciate a new pillow endorsement. Emily, you may have just cooked up something absolutely fantastic. I know people right now are going to be going, hang on a second. Isn't that Emily from Bad Buddy? Isn't that Emily from badbuddy.bandcamp.com?
That's the very one.
May I also reveal that you are kind of the big cheese behind the scenes when it comes to sound engineering on the album that we have adopted, that we are thrilled to have partnered with as our theme song, background music, extra music, and everything else. You were the technical magic behind Desolation Sounds, Ayla Brooke and the Soundman.
That's right. I engineered the record. I sang on the record. it's funny to, it's a small world. Let's all come
It is
together
a small
here
world.
at the Real Talk studio.
I love it. Well, listen, we're thrilled to have you on board. We're thrilled to have you on the team. Thank you for everything that you've done over the past few days. And I mean, because now it's kind of delicate and awkward, isn't it? Right? Because if I say we look forward to having you back, then Sam's going to be like, what's that supposed to mean?
Yeah. I'm
So-
listening.
I'm listening. He's like, I'm still here, you guys, and I will be back tomorrow. So, FYI. So thrilled to add Emily to the team. This is a great opportunity for me to remind you that right now, and maybe I have an email in my inbox, I'm quite disorganized, and so I bet you that the teams at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park probably did send me an email saying, hey, Ryan, here's the deal. Here's the new deal for Real Talkers, because the Father's Day cake promo went so swimmingly well. So many of you taking $5 off your Father's Day cakes at the Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, Y Gardens, and Baseline Road that I can't quite guarantee, but I can virtually guarantee that we'll be doing that again next Father's Day. There's a new promo coming up. You know what you could do in the meantime? If you're going, I'm looking at the weather today, and we are going to DQ today. Just pull up to the drive-thru window, drop my name, and see what happens. Maybe they'll give you your order for free. Maybe they'll charge you a little bit more. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but you could pull up to the drive-thru window or to the speaker, and you could just say, Jespo sent me. I'm a Real Talker. And they may say, or they may say, drive on through. And perhaps there's some sort of special treat. I don't know.
Rich hot fudge.
Oh my gosh, I have something I want to show you. I can't do it now.
Okay.
But I captured something on video this weekend. You know what? I'll tell you. Tomorrow, I will unveil it tomorrow on the show.
Okay.
A celebration of what the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park accomplished. In the meantime, head out there today. Tell them I sent you and see what happens. I love it. The team at Friesen Brothers, what a weekend for the Friesen Brothers in the South Edmonton store, that brand new one. And then, of course, Fort Saskatchewan and Stony Plain. If you live in those necks of the woods, I don't have to tell you about these stores. They're like, woo, baby. Well, they were absolutely, I mean, they were telling me the response to these Father's Day barbecue boxes off the charts. Real Talkers, way to go. You can send me the photos of how your Father's Day barbecue went, showing off those Friesen Brothers barbecue boxes. Make sure you use the hashtag RealTalkRJ. We'll show you a couple of those tomorrow. Friesen Brothers, 16 locations across the province of Alberta, proudly supporting Alberta producers, including Alberta honey. You have to see the display at the new store in South Edmonton, but every Friesen Brothers is proud to be promoting Albertans. They have been that way for more than 65 years. Alberta grown and Alberta owned. Also a reminder, the team at Kuby Energy, all this talk about sustainability, they are making that happen for people, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial applications. They got these Tesla walls. I mean, amazing. They're Tesla certified. Not everybody is. And so are their installers, including electricians. Get the job done right at kubyenergy.ca. Every Monday, our friends at Kuby Energy also get our week started off on the right foot. It's a little something we like to call positive reflections. Emily, why don't we start with a photo from James? We got this in. James sent it to us an hour before showtime today. He said, I know I'll probably have to wait for next week to get this shot in. He said, I know it's an hour before showtime, but we said, hell no, James. This is unbelievable. That's not a street lamp. For everybody that's listening right now on the podcast, you can find Positive Reflections as a standalone YouTube file. Just go check out our YouTube channel. This is the moon last night. This is absolutely stunning. This sent in from James, who wishes everybody, all the Real Talkers today, a very happy summer solstice. Now brace yourselves for these photos from Lisa. Lisa says, I wanted to share these images as a celebration of the beautiful night sky. I'm stealing this from my computer. Lisa sent it to us. I guess I'm not stealing it. I'm accepting the gift from Lisa. This is going to be my new wallpaper on my computer. This is stunning. She says, a celebration of the beautiful night skies we have in the province of Alberta. Says, I sure know they make me happy. Lisa says, I snapped both of these June 12th and 13th, about a week ago, east of High River in beautiful southern Alberta. Lisa says, thank you and have a great weekend. This is the Milky Way and Star Trails as featured from Frank Lake. That looks like Monet, doesn't it? I mean, that second one?
I would say more of a Van Gogh.
Oh, you're probably right. Like a Starry Night type of a thing. Yeah, Monet's a little more floral, isn't? Yeah, I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about.
Work it, own it.
Work it, own it.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, no, you know what you do? You just throw in little things like that where you say, no, it's more of a Monet, and people who know what I'm talking about. And then everyone kind of like, what is he talking about? And then they'll say, I guess I just don't know. Thank you, Ryan. You're welcome, everybody. And this from Kim, who sent this into Positive Reflections. She says, an entire year trying to graduate, trying to complete assignments, trying to learn in and out of school. An entire year living and learning under a veil of uncertainty, worry, fear, hope. A cycle repeated every time a teacher, class, or even themselves, students, isolated or quarantined. An entire year for some students, never seeing a classroom at all, not seeing their friends, not having new experiences for the last time while in the safety of childhood, not completing milestones like sports or other performances or ceremonies in a normal way, limited work and opportunity to earn and save for your fun and your future, and an entire year of worry about what comes next, accepting that opportunity and interest may be forever changed as a result of their pandemic year of high school. Well, here's the positive part, says Kim. The class of 2021, they did it. And whether they're ready to move on to the next steps in their journey or are taking time for a breather, class of 2021, you did it. Under extraordinary circumstances, no matter what comes next, Kim says, I'm so incredibly proud of my own graduating daughter, Eva, all her friends, and every member of the class of 2021. They're brave, they are discerning, they are thoughtful. Like Chef said today, they are leaders. They've sacrificed a great deal, some of the most important milestones of their young lives for an entire year to preserve their families, to protect our communities, and they deserve recognition. Every student, regardless of the measure of academics, accolades, or outcomes, deserves equal congratulations for managing this year the very best way they could. They are fierce. They are the best of us. Kim says a toast to the class of 2021. I'm right there with you, Kim. Thanks for that positive reflection. You can send us yours anytime during the week to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Make sure you label it Positive Reflections. Today, as we reflect, we do it together, collectively, under the spirit of National Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you for being part of this broadcast. Thank you for being an engaged citizen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow morning.